Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Sydney and today we are going to be talking about all of the books that I have read in April. I read 6 books in April, 2 of them were on my Kindle, and I'll also kind of give you my reading plans for May because I have a sort of hopeful TBR. Don't know if I'll stick to it. We never really know, do we? But it's kind of just the books that I have on my radar and the ones that I want to complete this month. So starting with my April reading wrap up, let's get into it. So the first book that I completed in April is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. I have been wanting to get into Brandon Sanderson for so long. It's been just years that I have been eyeing his books. I've been visualizing where I was going to start with this because I have to say for the longest time I was really intimidated by his writing because his books are very high fantasy and a lot of them include multiple books in a series. The world building is very intense and detailed, which I absolutely love. Don't get me wrong, that's probably my favorite type of writing and type of genre to consume, but I knew I just needed to be in the right headspace for one of his books, and I wanted to make sure that I was starting in his Cosmere universe with the right series. And I know that there's a lot of debate around like which of his books you should read first. I decided to go with Mistborn. This is the first book in a trilogy, and I'm so glad I started with this series. I freaking loved this. I had such a good time with this book. I absolutely loved the characters in this series so far. Kelsier is one of the most intriguing main characters to me because there were so many points in this book where I just didn't actually know if I trusted him, and it was sort of a feeling where I thought maybe this is an unreliable character and I just kind of have to stick around and see what happens with the plot. So this is very much a war, uprising, rebellion story, but it's so much more than that. This follows our main character, Vin. She is young and she is an orphan, so she lived with her brother her whole life, and for the longest time she was part of this underground community, or you could call it like a gang of some type, and she was sort of just wandering around from place to place and didn't really have a family, didn't really have any connections. At the beginning of the book she gets caught up with Kelsier and his band of, I guess, rebels you could say, and they have this plot where they're going to overthrow the empire, the final empire, and they have a lot of plans that they're trying to put into place, and they're just scheming on how they're going to pull this off. And Vin kind of gets caught up in it, and she sticks around with this group because she finds out that she has powers, and Kelsier is the person who can help her learn and harness and figure out how to use her powers. And so this story is so jam-packed with character development, with plot turns and twists, big reveals, and I just had so much fun with this. The last about 15% of this book had me like in complete shock, just blindsided and surprised and shocked by the developments that were happening with this plot. I've heard so many people say that Brandon Sanderson is pretty well known for how he ends his books, for how he ties everything together and just makes the ending so epic and fun and completely unpredictable, and that was definitely this. I also really loved the audiobook version. It's on Spotify, that's how I listened to this, so I kind of switched back and forth between reading the physical copy. I read some on my Kindle and I also listened to the audiobook. This is like one of those small mass market paperbacks, and so it's not super comfy to read. The text is kind of small and the book is just small itself, so I think that when I purchase physical copies for my shelf, I'm going to get the larger version. I know there's like so many different editions of this series with multiple different designs, and so I think I like the white and blue covers. I think maybe I'll insert a picture right here of what that looks like. I'm definitely going to complete this trilogy very, very soon, so I'm going to be buying a physical copy of the series to have on my shelf. Highly recommend if you're currently deciding whether or not you want to get into Brandon Sanderson's universe and to really dive into his writing. This is a great place to start. I found it so digestible. The world building is so unique, and the magic system is actually based on different types of metals, which I thought was really cool. Tin, brass, copper, and I just love that in a fantasy because it feels very, very realistic and it doesn't pull me out of it when there's like gaps in the magic system. This is very, very well done. And the next book that I read in April was Look Closer by David Ellis. This is the first thriller that I've read in quite some time. I think the most recent thriller I read was Riley Sager. I want to say it was like Survive the Night. I think that's what it's called. I read that back in December. So this was so good. This was a solid 4 stars. Oh, by the way, I rated this 5 stars. I forgot to say that. This is 5 stars. This was such a fun thriller. I have heard so many good things about this, and so when I was at Barnes & Noble a few months ago, I decided to pick this up. And the plot and the characters in this were so interesting. This is about a married couple named Simon and Vicky, and there's a $21 million trust fund involved. There's an affair, there's a murder mystery to be solved. There are so many different moving parts within this plot that had me just completely thrown for a loop every time there was a big reveal. In this book, you have no idea who to trust. You don't know which characters are telling the truth. You actually don't know if you trust the narrator or not. And there's multiple POVs in this book, which is really, really cool because you get to see the difference between each perspective and how each character perceives part of the plot happening, because it's different for everyone. It's like you're not really sure who to trust. And I said this in my quarterly wrap up when I was describing this book, but there's a quote in here that makes so much sense for just this plot. And that quote is, "The best lies are the ones closest to the truth." And literally this whole entire time you're like, I think I know what's happening, but I feel like there's some missing parts here. I feel like someone's not telling the truth. This book was such a fun, wild ride. There were like multiple plot twists. I would say there was like 3 or 4 that I was just shocked by. And I love the way it was written. The audiobook for this is incredible. There's multiple different voice actors. I highly recommend picking this one up. I rated this, again, 4 stars. And then I read When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker. This was such an anticipated read for me, and I ended up rating this 5 stars. This blew me out of the water. I'm a huge, huge fan of Sarah A. Parker. Her To Bleed a Crystal Bloom series is probably my current favorite fantasy romance series of all time. I even liked it better than ACOTAR. And this one was no different. This is one of the most unique romanticises that I have ever read. The plot is very different and original. There are still some typical fantasy tropes in here, but the way that she does them are just so refreshing, and it's not overdone. It's very, very pleasantly surprising, and the way that she does characters in this is so fun. There are so many different creatures that are original creatures. There are dragons in here, but they're not your typical dragons. We have a sassy female main character, a very kind but mysterious male main character, and the romance between these two, the slow build, the tension, the angst, was absolutely delicious. Like, I have so many tabs in this book. Not only was it beautifully written, but I just fell in love with the dynamic between these two characters. There's a big plot reveal that happens about midway through that just completely changes everything about how you thought this book was gonna go. And it's so unexpected, it's so surprising and beautiful and unique and magical. It's one of those books where you just really have to go into it blind. The plot is not necessarily easy to describe, and I almost feel like the less you know about this, the better. Definitely recommend picking up When the Moon Hatched. So good. I then read Clockwork Angel by Cassandra Clare. This is book 1 in the Infernal Devices series. I think this series came out at least 10 years ago. It is a little bit older. I've had my eye on this series for so long, and I have been wanting to pick it up for quite some time. This was so much fun. I rated this 4 stars. This is about our main character, Tessa, and she lives in America in the 1800s, and she receives a letter from her brother who lives in London asking her to come live with him because her aunt had recently passed. And so she essentially is ready to start her life over in 1800s London. The setting is so cool. We have witches and warlocks and vampires and shadow hunters, and I just really love the characters in this. I fell in love with Will and Jem, and we have a little bit of a love triangle situation blooming and blossoming in here, and wow, it is so good. It took me about like 30%, I would say, to get fully into the story, but then once the plot started unraveling, I was hooked and I couldn't put it down, and I'm just obsessed. And the next book I read was on my Kindle. I read Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez, and this is my first contemporary romance in quite a long time. I want to say years. It's been so long since I've picked up a modern romance because I don't typically reach for this genre. I don't know, I've had really bad luck with contemporary romance in the past. I find a lot of it to just be a bit cheesy, surface level, kind of cringe, and I think I have really big issues with the dialogue typically, and sometimes it just doesn't feel realistic. It feels a little bit over the top and just not quite, I don't know, like sometimes it just pulls me out of it. But I decided to take a chance on this one because I have been hearing so much about Abby Jimenez's writing and just how realistic it is and how raw and deep and vulnerable the characters that she writes are. And I think it's so important in a romance to have relationships that don't feel surface level. Like, I want to feel like I understand why these two people in love and I can see what brought them together, and I feel like the way that she touches on heavier topics like mental health and real life differences that might make it hard for people to be together. This is about our characters Daniel and Alexis, and they come from two very, very different upbringings and lifestyles, and they find themselves in a situation where they are drawn to each other, and this is their love story, but it's not a typical love story. It's very, like I said, realistic, and you get to see them navigating their differences and coming from two completely different backgrounds and how they are able to make that work. And they run into issues along the way and they're able to work through some things, and there's just some really deep conversations that are had and some very real topics that are touched on. And even beyond all that, there was so much humor and lightheartedness and just so many relatable moments that I found myself smiling and laughing. And I just had such a good time with this book. And I am usually fantasy, high stakes, magical, made up worlds. Like, that's usually my thing. But for some reason, I was just so in love with this. And I think I really just vibe with Abby Jimenez's writing. And I don't know that I'm going to be fully a contemporary romance girly from now on. I think it might just be her books, but we'll see. Maybe it's in the cards for me. I don't know. This one was so solid. I think I rated this about 4.5, 4 stars. And I'm definitely going to be reading the rest of this series. There's Yours Truly, which I actually started yesterday, and then there's Just for the Summer, which just recently came out. And they're all set in the same world, so I'm really excited to read more and just kind of see Daniel and Alexis make appearances and see these characters come together in different situations. And the final book that I read in April was All Systems Red by Martha Wells. I read this on my Kindle. This was a really fun science fiction novella. This is about a murder bot, and he's on a mission with a bunch of humans, and what happens is his governor module breaks, and so he is basically having to hide the fact that he has feelings, he has awareness. It's a really fun, cute story of him trying to protect the humans that he's working for while also navigating his own humanness. He really loves watching like soap operas and entertainment, and I loved the way this was written because the murder bot, he's the main character, it's told from his perspective, and you really feel like you're reading from a human's POV. I only rated it 2 stars because besides the fact that I liked the dialogue and the banter and kind of the character work of this, I was so confused, and I honestly think maybe I just read this at the wrong time, but I had no clue what was going on. And because it was a novella, the world building was very lacking, and I feel like there was just a lot of descriptors thrown out there that weren't actually like talked through or described, and I was just confused and kind of bored. I just feel like I didn't enjoy it, so there's that. I still probably will maybe read another book in this series and probably give it another chance because there's, I want to say 10 novellas in this Murderbot Diaries series, and I've heard a lot of good things, so maybe I'll try the second one and see if I have better luck with just understanding the plot and actually being engaged, so we'll see. Okay, so let's talk my May TBR. I have a few books that I have lined up, and then I have a couple that are either on my Kindle or I don't own physical copies yet. The first book I did mention already is Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. I started this yesterday, or I think a couple days ago, and I'm pretty close to being finished, and I'm really liking this one. I'm not sure quite yet if I enjoy it as much as I loved Part of Your World, but I feel like this relationship between Brianna and Jacob is so much fun. There's a bit of fake dating involved. Their relationship is just very lighthearted. It starts with a friendship, and I feel like it's starting to turn into something more, and I'm really connecting with it. Again, I just love Abby Jimenez's writing, and so I'm thinking I'm gonna rate this one probably pretty high. Either a 4 or 5 stars, we'll see how it ends. So that's what I'm currently reading. And then I'm also currently reading Leviathan Wakes. This is the first book in the Expanse series by James A. Corey. This is a sci-fi space opera, and it is blowing me away. This book is absolutely incredible. First, I think we need to take a second for the hot pink sprayed edges. Is this not one of the most beautiful special edition books you've ever seen? I just love this so much. What's really cool is that you have a map on the inside, but it's not like your typical fantasy map. This is a map of the solar system. This is a fictional solar system inside the Expanse universe, and so we have the belt, we have different space stations, we've got like Jupiter and Mars and Earth, and Sol, which is the sun. And I just think this is so cool because you can kind of see the distance between each of the different stations and the different planets. The inside just, wow. And what's really cool is this takes place several hundred years in the future. We have a very futuristic setting, and the world is essentially the entire solar system. So it's very, very expansive. We have so many different characters, many different really high stakes epic plot elements. We've got battles and crime and mysteries to be solved, and I am just so loving and enjoying this so much. My husband is a huge fan of the TV show on Amazon Prime, and he's been basically trying to convince me to either watch the series or read the series for the longest time, so I decided to pick up the book, and I'm so glad. I'm about 25% in, and I'm having so much fun with this plot and the characters. I love the space aspect. I love that there's so much science and technology involved. It's so creative and unique. And George R.R. Martin himself, who wrote Game of Thrones, said that this is basically a space opera the way it's meant to be written. So you know high praise coming from Game of Thrones King is going to be well received, and I totally see it. This is essentially Game of Thrones in space, and I'm having this the best time. And after I finish Leviathan Wakes, I want to read Outlander. Finally, I've been putting this on my TBR for months and months. I think I'm just saving this for the right time because I know this is going to be such a good read for me. I have been a huge, obsessive fan of the TV series for a couple of years now. Basically binged it all in 2022 and did nothing else, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since. So I'm so excited to pick up the book, and what's special about this is that it's actually signed by Miss Diana Gabaldon herself. I just can't believe I own this. I can't believe I own this copy. I was at Barnes & Noble a couple of weeks ago, and I saw that they were selling signed copies of Outlander. I could not believe I got this lucky to be able to pick up a signed copy. So I'm so excited to read this. I will probably be vlogging it. I don't know. I kind of want to do a whole video dedicated to Outlander, maybe some differences and similarities to the show. And I just think that'll be a really fun time to just document the process because I have been looking forward to this for so long. So I think May is going to be the month that I finally dive in. Next, I want to read People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. Again, I said I was probably creeping into my contemporary romance era, and I've been really curious about Emily Henry for so long. Everyone loves this author, and I know that her book's Funny Story just came out, and I've been getting a little bit of FOMO wanting to read that. I haven't had a bunch of luck with Emily Henry's books in the past. I started Book Lovers, but I didn't finish it because I just wasn't super connecting with it. I might pick that up again later and try it again, but I do have this on my TBR because I will be going on vacation to the beach very shortly, and I'm excited to be reading this while on vacation because it just makes sense. And I just heard a lot of good things about this. I feel like it'll be a fast, fun, quick-paced read and just perfect to read while I'm on the beach getting some sun. And the next book that I want to read, I don't own a copy yet, but I think I might read this on my Kindle. This is a series that I have had on my radar for so long, and I think that I'm really going to love it. It's one of those things where I'm predicting it'll be a 5-star read, so I've been putting it off and just kind of saving it for the right time, and that is Spark of the Everflame by Penn Cole. I am so excited to dive into this. I have been really looking for a fun new fantasy romance series to get into. I believe there's 3 books out already, and I think a 4th one is on its way. This is supposed to be a fantasy romance, major slow burn, angst, tension, which is my favorite. I need more slow burn in my life. I've just been craving that lately, and so I've heard nothing but great things about this book, and I'm really excited to read it. So stay tuned for my thoughts on that. And last but not least, what I have on my TBR for May is the second book in the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson, and this one is Well of Ascension. I really want to read this one this month because I don't want to wait too long between books before I read the next in the trilogy, because I know with Brandon Sanderson's world building, there's a lot of details and intricate points that I don't want to forget. So I'm hoping to jump into this one very soon. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, I do want to buy a physical copy of this series so I can have it on my shelf and so I can read it physically. And I'm just really looking forward to reading more of his books. I do eventually want to read the Stormlight Archive, which, if you're familiar, I think it's 3 books, or maybe it's 6, but there's like a trilogy and then a second trilogy. I'm not entirely sure, but I do know that each book is over 1,000 pages long, and so I might be dedicating about a month of my life pretty soon to completing that series, because it's one of those that I just want to throw myself into it because I've heard that it's just one of the most epic fantasy stories of all time, with the best characters, the best world building. And so eventually I will get around to reading that series as well. But of course I want to finish Mistborn first. So that is all for today's video. Leave a comment and let me know if we shared any of the same reads for April, or if you have any of the same books on your TBR as I do. And I'm so excited to chat more books and share more updates as I continue reading. All right, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.